Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this reading wrap up. I've had a horrible time with technology over the course of the last month, and so we're here. A little bit low tech, but here nonetheless. And not without good reason did I split this reading month up into two parts as far as the wrap up goes. Because I read a lot. Went through a lot, had a lot of time and opportunities to go through some different books. We went through some underrated sci-fi and fantasy books. We fulfilled some of the commitments that I made at the beginning of the year, saying I was absolutely going to read these books. We read some great indie reads that we'll be talking about, and I also read one of the most famous fantasy novels ever written, and one that I had not read up to this point. So we're going to kick this all off with a recommendation that a book that I've been aware of for a long time, but specifically read it this month because of Zachary Shea, fellow booktuber and good friend, and this is A Drowned Kingdom by P.L. Stewart. This is a self-published fantasy novel that sort of takes the myth of Atlantis and puts it into a fantasy epic. I believe there's 5 books out now. This is the first of them, and that the plan is for it to be a 7-book series. PL can correct me if I'm misremembering there. But Zach wanted to host a read-along and got a bunch of other booktubers and invited me to join it. And I said I at least wanted to read book 1 since I've heard about this one for quite a while, but have never gotten around to reading it. And overall, my thoughts are I really enjoyed this. Honestly, if I had to compare this or my experience reading this to any other indie fantasy book, it would probably be something like Sword of Kaigen, where it's not something that's going to work for everyone. There are some odd things about the structure of this book. There are things that PL is able to do that are daring and interesting and really, really different that you wouldn't be able to do in most trad published books. And so I really like that. But just like in Sword of Kaigen, where there are some things that are a little uneven, there are some things that maybe won't work as well for some readers. I think that's the case here. So for me, this is the comparison I would use is you've got something like in the old Narnia movies, you've got like the first one, which is just consistently just like good all the way through. Not great, not bad, just good. And then you've got something like Prince Caspian, which has some moments that'll have you scratch your head a little bit, and then some moments which are like, oh, that's awesome. That's like what this is. There are some moments that didn't work as well for me, and some moments that are awesome. So to summarize this, it tells the story of the second prince of the kingdom of Atlantis, named Othrin. And he is recounting the story of how he is leading a group of the only survivors to survive this cataclysm that destroyed his nation's kingdom. And they have fled from the nation of Atlantis. For the first bit, we get to see them and see what the kingdom of Atlantis was like, and see the political structure that Othrin is coming out of, how important it is that he's the second prince, that he's sort of the spare. This is sort of like Prince Harry, but in fantasy form. And then as the book goes on, we see him having to rise up, having to become a leader, having to lead the refugees from Atlantis as they go to the mainland and figure out what they're going to do. Are they going to make alliances? Are they going to set up a colony? Are they going to establish their own kingdom? And one of the big conflicts, and PL will talk about this, as will a lot of reviewers, one of the big conflicts in A Drowned Kingdom is this clash between worldviews and religions, because the Atlanteans come from a very monotheistic society. They believe in one god. That's it. Magic, that's all nonsense. The pagans, they're just superstitious, and many of the people that they encounter over on the mainland are pagans. They have druids. They believe in magic. Some of them practice magic. And so there's some really interesting things that PL does in this book where Othrin is maybe not a very devout person. His religious beliefs are more of a license for him to justify positions that he already holds, which I think many of us, or maybe all of us, know people in real life who do that with their religious beliefs. And also, you have this interesting clash where, as Othrin experiences more and more people of differing belief systems, he realizes that maybe there's more in heaven and earth than he dreamed of in his books of philosophy. And so I think that element of it is really interesting. I will say there are some... The Atlantean religion to me at least, read very much as sort of a fantasy take on modern day views of monotheism. So specifically, Christianity, with a lot of, at least there were some instances where it seemed very like Protestant to me in terms of some of the arguments that were used in favor of monotheism. And there's definitely a place for those arguments. I don't see Othran as being a very compelling theologian, though. And in many of the arguments that he had with the Druids or with people who disagree with him theologically, I didn't feel like his arguments in favor of his belief system were necessarily well reasoned or well thought out. And that may be a fault of him as a character. It may be that this is fully in the character's head and is not a fault of the book. It's just an observation that I'm making. So I found the religious ideas and the religious questions being asked to be much more interesting in how they played out in the story rather than in the debates and discussions between characters, some of which I found to be just not as compelling personally. But there are some really interesting ways that these questions are interweaved with other elements. So we're talking about the Atlantis myth, but there are also things from the Bible that seem to be blended in here. Othran has elements of like a King David type of character. There's almost literally a David and Goliath situation that's almost inverted in the story. There's elements of like an Old Testament like prophet type of character, think like Samuel, that gets brought into here. And so there's some interesting elements that P.L. Stewart plays with, as well as like Arthurian elements as well. The magic stuff in this book is really interesting. Some of it is dark, and Othran starts to encounter spiritual beings who claim to have certain amounts of power or who claim to be connected to him in significant ways, and I don't know if I should believe them or not. I'm not even sure if Othran believes them. And so there's some interesting ambiguity there in what's really going on behind the scenes in A Drowned Kingdom. So I've said this before when I've talked about the book, but PL was gracious enough to send me this copy to sign it and personalize it. Let's see if we can pull it up there. Boop. So thank you, PL, for this book. I really enjoyed this. I think this is an excellent self-published fantasy novel. Like I said, I have my own quibbles with it. I have my own thoughts. But in terms of what self-published fantasy is able to do, and I guess I should expound on that a little bit more here. I have a lot of thoughts on this one, and there's a lot of things that could be said, but I also don't want to beat a dead horse or anything. This is told in first person, in the same way that something like the Sun Eater, Book of the New Sun, the Kingkiller Chronicles, you name it, in the same way that those are told. And with many of those books, there's a certain level of suspension of disbelief that you have to have, because you have to understand that the person telling the story would not literally go into this much detail about what's going on. I mean, for Pete's sake, Wise Man's Fear is supposed to, Kvothe is supposed to be telling the story over the course of one night. And I think the audiobook for Wise Man's Fear is like over 40 hours long. So it's like, obviously, you wouldn't be able to fit this much into one night. Now, some do a better job justifying that than others, but still, this is written in an older style that actually feels like if Prince Othran were putting pen to paper, here's how he would describe these things. Here's how he would recount these conversations. Here's how he would talk about himself. And many people don't like Othran as a character. If you hear people who review this, they'll be like, great book, but like Othran's kind of a gray character, and I'm not necessarily going to disagree with that, other than to say there's this like arrogant noble archetype, like the arrogant or foppish duke, that I just love. Like Giselle in the First Law trilogy, like was my favorite. Just seeing his own arrogance and his own ego and making a fool of himself. Like I ate that up. And a much darker character, but there's a character in Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett, who's much darker and is much more evil than Giselle, but is a similar type of thing where just seeing him high on his own opinion of himself is just hilarious. And so, yeah, Othran obviously has a lot of beliefs that maybe aren't palatable to modern audiences, but like that's okay. Like we're all adults here. You'll be just fine. You can understand that there are characters who will believe different things than you, and especially people from different points in history obviously had different moral structures and ways that they saw the world. And so the wrestling of that I think is really interesting. And I think Othran is just a fantastic character. I think PL does a very good job making a distinct set of side characters in this, even with other first person narrative stories that I like, um, it's easy for the side characters to kind of get lost, for them to just kind of fall into the background. And that is not the case here. Um, his brother, his father, his uncle, some of the people around him, some of his cousins, all felt very distinct and memorable afterwards. So, yeah, I really enjoyed this. I think this is one of the better self published fantasy novels that I've read this year. And I look forward to see where the story goes from here. Next, I'm going to talk about briefly, and I'm not going to go over this one too much in depth, but I finally read Lord of Light by Roger Zelazny. This is his Buddhist sci-fi novel, which is essentially set way out in the future, where on a planet the aristocracy, the upper class, the government have sort of used technology to make themselves appear as the gods of, I believe it's the Hindu pantheon, and to reinstate like a caste system. And so reincarnation becomes a literal thing of they will take consciousnesses from people and plant them in new bodies, and you get an elevated station or a decreased station based on how much karma the government or the elites think you have acquired. And it's about a man basically being like, all right, if you're going to impersonate them, then I'm going to play the part of the Buddha and try to liberate these people, try to overthrow it. So this is a weird novel in a lot of ways. This is one of the books that I said I for sure wanted to read this year. I've not read Zelazny before, and I wanted to get to this. So this is a very bizarre novel in a lot of ways, where Zelazny intentionally wrote it to try to be a book that you could read both as a fantasy novel and as a sci-fi novel, and I definitely get that. This is a prototype to the incense punk movement, along with like Canticle for Leibowitz, Dune, Warhammer, Hyperion, of novels that look at religion in a futuristic setting. And even though this one isn't quite what the incense punk movement, which is like more of a modern sci-fi movement, isn't quite on the same vein, it is close enough that I definitely wanted to see that through line through sci-fi history. So I will say this is a very interesting novel. There's a lot of interesting things to think about. I did not find really any of the characters to be more than that, more than just, oh, interesting. So yeah, very compelling novel in a lot of ways. Like there's some fun ideas that are played with here. I don't see this as being an all-time like read for me, but your mileage may vary as far as that goes. We're also going to briefly cover another sci-fi novel here, which is going to be Abbott in Darkness by D.J. Butler. So this is the fourth novel by D.J. Butler that I've read this year. I've read the first two Cunning Man books, his politically incorrect guide to sci-fi and fantasy. This one, and actually I'm currently, as of recording this, reading the third Cunning Man book. And so this is a sci-fi novel. I've only read fantasy and obviously nonfiction from him. And this is set in a version of the future that is sort of like the pioneers of America, where it's not just like, oh, we go off and we seek our fortune and we go sail the seven seas. It's like, no, we like pick up our family, move our entire family across the country out into the wilderness and like try to set up a trading post and make a living trading with the miners out there, maybe with some of the indigenous people there. So we follow the main character, John Abbott, who's essentially an accountant for this sci-fi version of the East India Company, and ends up getting involved in a murder mystery far away from home, out on this faraway planet that's like through a wormhole and everything, and has to figure out how to navigate both who's in it, who's involved in this murder, how do I figure this out while also protecting my own family, and am I being betrayed from behind? Like, is the company in on this as well? So this is a fun novel in a lot of ways. I did not enjoy this as much as Butler's Cunning Man books. I think those are just particularly special, and also like particular to my taste. But if you like sci-fi, I would definitely recommend giving this a read. Butler does this thing similar to what he does in the Cunning Man books, where he takes a concept that should be boring, which is like accountant solves a murder mystery. What? Kind of like with the Cunning Man, where it's like beet farmer is a wizard, like Mormon beet farmer. So what? That shouldn't be interesting, and he makes it gripping. This is a novel that doesn't overstay its welcome. There's some fun sci-fi elements that are played with. It does feel of a type of like that older sci-fi from like the 60s and 70s. Think like Arthur C. Clarke, that type of thing came to mind. but with really great characters. John Abbott and his family are great. His just like with the Cunning Man books, where Hiram Woolley and his son feel like a very good depiction of like a father and son relationship with each other. John Abbott and his wife and their daughters um, feel like a very good depiction of like a family, of like a nuclear family, which you don't always see in sci-fi and fantasy. Often it's like, lone rangers or, maybe a couple, or like people with a tragic backstory, but you don't often see just like normal families trying to work through difficult things in the future. And you do get to see that here in Abbott in Darkness. So I think that was very much worth a read, a very fun read. And if you like sci-fi and you're interested in DJ Butler, this is a standalone, at least right now, and can definitely be read as such. It doesn't waste your time. It's very snappy, and I really enjoyed that. One last sci-fi novel that we'll talk about here is going to be Shards of Honor by Lois McMaster Bujold. This is, again, another Promises Kept moment. This is the first book in the Vorkosigan saga, by Bujold, and I said that the Vorkosigan saga was one of the series that I was absolutely going to start this year. Shards of Honor is a unique novel in some ways. It has not got I don't know, I didn't feel like it had a super traditional structure, but it's essentially like a romance, but in outer space, where you've got these two nations, these two futuristic nations that are at war, and you've got Cordelia Naismith, who's on a very much like more socially liberal type of country that she comes from that's part of the war. And then you've got Errol Vorkosigan, who comes from the, if I'm remembering correctly, the Bariaran nation, which is almost like, I don't know, I've heard some people call them like space communists, essentially. I'm not sure if that's technically correct or not. And my understanding is you get a better idea of the political inner workings of the Vorkosigan saga as the series goes along. But they're on two opposite sides of the conflict, and they keep meeting, and their paths keep intersecting. And basically from the beginning that this is going to be a romance. This is going to be about how the two of them came together. And my understanding is that the main character of the rest of the Vorkosigan saga is their kid. So that there's just a couple novels that are more prequels about them together before their son is born. I really liked this book. Similar to Abbott in Darkness, this is just a fun sci-fi novel. I do think there's some really interesting and deep things that Bujold does here, especially in exploring how personal connections and relationships are so much more important and transcend political differences. Especially, as of the time of recording this in 2025, where the mantra seems to be, if you disagree with me on a political issue, it's not just that you're incorrect. It's not just that we are being fed different sets of information. It's not just that we're seeing things from a different point of view. It's like, no, you are a monster. You are morally evil. And I'm not even, I can't bear to even be around you. And I actually wish you harm if you disagree with me on a political point. And if it's a member of your family, well then, don't have them over for Christmas. Don't have them over for Thanksgiving. And, this is a soapbox, this is like the one political point that I'll talk about of how divisive it is. This is my one soapbox on that I'll talk about. And I think Bujold does a really good job illustrating that actually relationships between people, having compassion, wishing for the greatest good for another person, being willing to lay down your own wants and desires and your own priorities in service to somebody else, that those things actually transcend political differences. And Bujold is a honest enough writer and an intelligent enough writer that she doesn't just write one side as the clear good guys and one side as the bad guys, but actually shows that there are good things about both systems, and there's really dark underbellies to both as well. And in fact, there are some of those cliches that she has the characters start believing, where it's like, oh, I got to know this other side, and I had all these misconceptions, but actually they're great, and then realize, oh, yes, I had some misconceptions, but also there's some dark things going on here as well. So I won't talk about this a whole lot, other than to say, this definitely motivated me to want to read the rest of the Vorkosigan saga, or at least more of it. So I'm not sure when that will be, but I'm at this point, I'm all in on Bujold. I have the Spirit Ring by her. I just bought the World of the Five Gods trilogy that she wrote, and I have a number of the Four Kosugen books queued up as well. So I'm excited to read more of them, hopefully soon. Next, we're going to talk about another indie book that I read, and this is My Father's Ghost by A.C. Wilson. This is book 2 in his Gwambi tetralogy. This is like Tolkien meets Treasure Island. There is a group of pirates that have invaded a colonial-style town because the town was built on the rubble of an ancient, think like fantasy Aztec civilization that may or may not be haunted by a dark eldritch entity that nobody, not even the pirates, are fully aware of what it is that they're potentially unleashing in their thirst for ancient lost treasure. And so while they're invading the town, there's also a bunch of characters from the town that are trying to defend it, find the treasure before they do. There's also an inner, like almost revolution that's happening inside the colony that's making things much more tricky. And so we follow characters like Ella, who in book 1 was kidnapped by the pirates and brought across the ocean because they thought her father might know something about it. So it's a pressure point, for them to hopefully get more information about this lost treasure that they're seeking after. And she's escaped from them by this point and is in the town, is trying to create a coalition between many of the town members. But we also have Holly, who's pictured here on the cover, whose family encounters great tragedy at the hand of the pirates. And so she must figure out what it is that the pirates are after and what's the best way to oppose them. And anyway, I'm doing a bad job pitching it here other than to say A.C. Wilson's strength is really, like, his world building is great. It's really good. His plotting is excellent. These books move at a great pace without feeling rushed or without feeling like we're not getting time to breathe. But his great strength really is his characters. Ella and Holly, the pirate Ernest, who has been a pirate from a very young age, does not know another life, and yet his conscience tortures him for the things that he sees his mates doing. The dark archaeomancer, who's an albino, who uses ancient artifacts to extract some sort of dark magic that he's using in favor of the pirates. The cruel pirate Killjelly, who has not just one hook on his hand, he has 2 hooks on his missing hand. The great characters of this series really are what bring it to life, and the Gwambi tetralogy is probably my favorite indie fantasy stuff that's being written right now. So I strongly recommend you guys check it out. Book 3 is about to come out. That's My Father's God, and book 4 is coming out next year. So if you like swashbuckling fantasy, if you like flintlock fantasy at all, cannot recommend this highly enough. We do have, has been teased out earlier, it is in the thumbnail, Gardens of the Moon by Steven Erikson, but we're going to talk about one other thing first, which is Zachary Shea, who's very quickly stacking up a TBR debt to me in that I am reading lots of books that he's been recommending to me. So he's going to have to start paying, he's going to have to pay the piper here eventually. He also recommended, I think this is one of his favorite books either last year or 2 years ago, Lost Boy by Christina Henry. And this is sort of giving Peter Pan the Maleficent treatment, where you're like, the Wicked treatment. Like, it's a prequel where you actually see that the bad guy is just misunderstood. And in concept, I do not like those types of stories in general. I'm not saying that those stories can't ever be good or well told. I just don't like the basic conceit of taking somebody else's story and being like, well, actually, did you know that? I think even like the Russians did this with Lord of the Rings. I think they did a version where they're like, actually, Aragorn was in the invader and the oppressor of the orcs. And it's like, it's such a nonsense. But Zach assured me that the strength of Christina Henry's writing and the strength of just the story of Lost Boy would be able to overcome that. And as it turns out, he's right. This is a great book. This is essentially a prequel talking about how Captain Hook was originally a lost boy and then about how he and Peter Pan went from being best of friends to being rivals, to being enemies. And yeah, you see that play out. And what Christina Henry does is she does a really good job pulling elements from the original Peter Pan books, which was one of my favorite books when I was younger, when I was growing up. She does a really good job pulling out little details, like Peter Pan's forgetfulness, how he's basically like the spirit of youth, of childishness in a lot of ways. She does make him a little bit more vindictive and evil than he is in the books, but I guess that's to be expected in this type of story. And I also feel like, and probably the reason why this is like a solid 4-star that I really liked rather than like a 5-star and an all-timer for me, is I never felt like we got with the character of Captain Hook. He's called Jamie. We understood why he hated Peter Pan so much by the end, but we never got a clear understanding for like what would make him want to murder like the other Lost Boys or like Wendy Darling, and John and Michael, like what we see in the original Peter Pan book. So we never quite got to like full maniacal like supervillain Captain Hook, which like is fine, but that's something that I was looking for. Like, okay, how are we gonna go all the way? And it doesn't quite go all the way. And then also the other point that I would make is we only ever hear about Jamie and Peter Pan's friendship. At the start of the book basically starts with their friendship starting to come apart and conflict starting between these two. Um, but we never really see them as best friends. And that's okay, except the main conceit of the story is about their relationship falling apart, right? And so I would have liked to have seen them be best of friends and fall apart from there. But this was a great read. I really enjoyed it. It was very easy to get through, but also um, heartfelt and really touching and really sad in a lot of ways. I listened to the audiobook, which was read by Sam Rukin, who also reads the Sun Eater books, and he did a great job with this one. Um, I mean, he's very good at voicing these types of characters, as you will know if you have listened to him voice Hadrian Marlowe. So that's Lost Boy. Thanks, Zach, for recommending this. This was a great read. And now we are going to get on to what probably many of you are here for, my thoughts on Gardens of the Moon. Like I said, one of the most famous fantasy novels ever written. This is both on my 25 books that I was for sure going to read in 2025, but then also one of the top 10 series that I wanted to start. This is Malazan, Book of the Fallen. This is a perfect example of how expectations can influence your reading experience. Because I went into Gardens of the Moon with every disclaimer being told this is the weakest in the series. It was originally a screenplay. Stephen Erickson was originally a short story author. The structure is kind of weird. If you didn't jive with this one, just wait till Dead House Gates. All of it, if you don't understand things, just keep reading. It'll make sense later on. Like, every excuse, every, disclaimer, I've heard them all. And that, like, I'd be lying if I said that didn't influence me, right? Like, this isn't some, like, raw, pure, virginal experience I'm having with Malazan. I know the hype around this series. And I know, saying, like, hey, guys, I'm a big Gene Wolfe fan, which I am. Then there's also this, like, but will you like Steven Erikson as well? He's also, like, a smart guy's, sci-fi and fantasy author. And so I'd be lying if I didn't say that, like, I want to like this series. And I went into it wanting to like the series. And so I'm biased going into it, and I'll just openly admit that. And I gotta say that there's a lot about this book that I really loved. And I guess I should say that makes me sound like I'm negative. I am positive on Gardens of the Moon, but I'd say I'm probably mixed to positive. There are parts of the book that never came together for me, that I never fully understood. Especially things with the Assassin's Guild. Like, I guess let me walk you through sort of how this goes. So for the first part, for like part one, I was like, all right, I feel like I've tracked with almost everything. Got it, making sense. And then for part two, like with the Siege of Pale, it's like, okay, this is making sense. I'm tracking with this. And for the two people watching this who don't know what Gardens of the Moon is about, basically a vast fantasy empire called the Malazan Empire is trying to take over this continent called Ginabakis, and the last city remaining is called Darujistan, and the Malazan Empire is sending in the last crew of, or a crew of the Old Guard that the Empress is like sort of trying to secretly get rid of, called the Bridge Burners, and they're part of the assault upon Darujistan. But also there's maybe rumors that some big Hail Mary attempt that could have catastrophic consequences in a supernatural way is going to be attempted against Darujistan. And so we see this conflict play out from all sorts of point of views, from people within the Malazan army, and then within a lot of people within the city as well. So yeah, once we got to part 3 and it became about the inner workings of the city of Darujistan, that's where Erickson started to lose me, because there became more and more things introduced with less and less reasons for me to care about. So if I talk about my favorite characters, like Perrin, Sari, Whiskey Jack, many of those were people that I met early on in the book. Even characters like Krupp and Crocus I met early on as we're getting to the inner workings of Darujistan. But as Erickson expands the point of views more and more and more, and as more elements are brought in, and as there's more like, oh, put a pin in that, put a pin in that, put a pin in that, my ability to care about those things, or at least emotionally connect with them, started to drop off more. So when something's happening with Sari, when something's happening with Crocus, I was really invested in it. But then there'd be like, oh, and here's like this high lady noble, and some of the things that are going on politically with her. I was a little bit more like, eh, like I don't care as much about it, and I wanted to care about all of it. Um, there's a good and I guess I should say this already. I've been pretty open about the fact that epic fantasy is just a tough genre for me. There's a lot of epic fantasy stories that I like, but when I feel like I'm having to do homework, when I'm feeling like I'm having to remember dozens of different things, that can hinder my enjoyment. So there's already a bit of an uphill battle going on here. The first half of this book really did feel almost like a short story collection. So when people say he's a short story author, like, checks out. Where we're getting little mini vignettes of different characters, and then we go from there to another mini, like almost short story of another character. I will say, people say Erickson doesn't hold your hand, but on the flip side, when you track with something, when you see what he's doing, when you catch a payoff right before it happens, it feels so rewarding. It's like the Captain America meme of like, ha, I understood that reference. So some of the things with like Sari in this book, I actually like tracked with what he was doing. It was like, oh, that's so interesting. The subplot with like Animander Rake, who's obviously a fan favorite in the Malazan community, and once again, there's an example of like, I'm being influenced by expectations, but I thought he was great. I thought he was really interesting. I thought the whole subplot with the Tistandi was great. There's a certain element to this where this is almost like fantasy Pride and Prejudice, in the sense of like Pride and Prejudice is all about like, don't judge people based on your first appearances or your first assumption about them, because you might gain more information later on that will recontextualize things, and that's all throughout this book. I'll just say, like, there's a famous dinner scene in this book that really does that a lot. I don't know that I would read 10 more books structured like this, written exactly like this, that are this size and longer. But the things about this world, many of the characters here, some of the things that Erickson is playing with in here, make me excited to read on. And everybody says you should at least read the first 2 or 3 before deciding if it's for you or not. And I'm going to. I'm excited to at least be part of the conversation. Like, so many people have talked about Malazan at this point. It's like, is it even worth covering? Like, do I have anything more to add? And I'm not sure that I do, other than to say, like, I'm glad that I read this. There are parts, everybody says, like, oh, you get it more on a reread, or I say everybody, a lot of people will say that. Even once I finished the book, and I'm no longer trying to track with, like, okay, so what's happening next? Even just having finished book 1, I went back and reread a couple of passages and was able to go, oh, I get more what was going on here. So, yeah, I think I'm willing to see where Erickson goes in the next couple of books, and I'm excited for that. And I was talking to some of my Malazan friends who loved Gardens even on a first read. I was talking about, like, okay, so what was this? I'm confused about this. And I'm like, oh yeah, we were confused about that too. I'm like, what was this whole thing with acorns? And they're like, oh yeah, you won't understand that for a long time. So some of my confusion seems to be pretty normal. I'm not sure. So overall, I enjoyed a lot of things about this book. I'm overall positive on it. I wouldn't say that I loved it though, but I'm also willing to give book 2 a shot. see how that goes. I am excited to get into book 2 when the time comes. So that's all I read in the month of September. This being mid-October, I guess I'll briefly update you. I did finish The Devil in a Forest by Gene Wolfe, which I was supposed to finish in September. Alas, that did not happen. And then I read The Power That Preserves by Stephen Donaldson, which I had on my TBR. So we'll be covering that in the next wrap-up. And I'm right now sitting at the 50% mark of Shogun by James Clavell, which has been the big read for the month. And then because I hate myself and hate my TBR, I decided to reread Canticle for Leibowitz, which I just read last month. But I want to do a deep dive on this. I'm going to be having a conversation with Andy Smith, the booktuber, about this. But I also want to do just a longer, in-depth video on Canticle, because this really has become one of my favorite sci-fi novels of all time. So I'm doing a reread of that, as I said before. I'm also reading Butler's third Cunning Man book called The Familiar Spirit. And then after that, I have an arc for the newest Cameron Winter mystery by Andrew Clavin called After That, the Dark, which I could not be more excited to read. And I also read a couple other of Clavin's books to catch up with that. So already, it's been a busy month. It's been a very busy month. So Shogun is the big beast going forward here. It'll be interesting. I'll have some thoughts on that one. So thank you guys for watching this wrap-up. Thank you for bearing with me through the technological issues. But what did you guys read in the month of September? What would you say your favorite book that you read this last month has been? In terms of this wrap-up, I guess I should say both wrap-ups. Overall for the month, it's definitely Canticle for Leibowitz. I think that's going to be in contention for top 3 books of the year for me. So thank you guys for watching. I will see you next time. Take care.